like to say thank you very much for attending this. This is the city's first planned business district open house. This is the first project that's actually been submitted to the city for this type of application. And I would like to state that I do have an agenda, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And please, if there's any concerns or you can't see or hear during the meeting, please feel free to either physically raise your hand or go down to the bottom. You can send a chat and or raise your hand. And Jenny, who's helping moderate the meeting, she will go ahead and indicate and respond to you, or I will myself. So in looking at the agenda here, you can see that the purpose of the meeting, this is actually the public's first opportunity for the city to share information to you about this particular proposal. The whole point of the meeting is to get information to you, see what type of information you need and provide that information, and to let you know how the city's review process will go for this development proposal and what opportunities there will be at a later date. Oh, someone says I'm not sharing my screen. So is it visible? Can you folks see my screen? Because I see it highlighted here. Okay, thank you. So again, the purpose of the meeting is to let you know the city's review process and at what points that you will have opportunity to provide public input. This is the first opportunity is at the neighborhood open house. Then the next step in the process will be the city's technical review process, followed by what you may be familiar with is the Cipa threshold determination. And that is where the environmental impacts of the project are assessed and what type of impacts are going to be mitigated by the developer. And that decision is issued out to outside agencies and the public for comment. Then should NIF pending any Cipa appeal and approvals for the Cipa, if it's moved forward through the development review process, then a public hearing is held on the proposal. And at that point, public comment is also requested and submitted for the public hearing for review and consideration. So there are several more steps in the process where you can submit comments to the city on the project. And I just wanted to get that out there so you are aware of that. In the agenda this evening, I'll go ahead. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Christy Schmidt. I am the senior planner on the project. I've spoke with most of you previously and provided you some information. So I'd like to say thank you very much for attending tonight's meeting. And in addition, we have the applicant here. And if we could get them to introduce themselves, or if you want to look on your screen, I'd kindly point them out. We have Samantha Smith. She is the prime contact from LDC. And then we have Clay White, who's here this evening. And then we also have Joe Hopper, and he is the project engineer for the applicant. So likely if there's some technical questions this evening, they will likely be also responding to you. Just a couple basic ground rules for online meetings if you haven't attended one before. Just common courtesy and respect. Again, if you have a question, please try not to interrupt, but to either physically raise your hand or raise your hand via Zoom or submit your question. And you can always email me your question or send something in later if you have an afterthought or something that you want to know. So with that, unless there's any process and procedure questions, I was just going to go ahead and go into some basic background information regarding this particular area before the applicant provides you an overview of the project proposal. And then once the applicant's done sharing details about the project, we'll open it for questions to you, and then the applicant and or city staff will respond. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this one and just go to another document here. Okay. So can you all see the location on the screen of the aerial of the project proposal? So most of you are familiar with the site because I understand a lot of people walk by this site. So as you can see here, here's Grade Road, and let me get a pointer going here with my arrow. Let's see, we're gonna go ahead and use the spotlight. Here's Grade Road over here, as you can see. And then we have Hartford over here on the south. This is the project site, obviously. It's about 22 acres, and as most people are aware, it contains an extensive amount of wetlands on the site. Over half the property is within critical areas, which I think is a key concern and a key asset also of the project. And as we move down on the screen here, we're going to scroll down. Let's get the eraser going here. We don't need the pink line the rest of the time. So as we move through the project timeline, many of you have been involved with this particular project for many years or have been aware of the historical nature of the site. Even around 2008, the city purchased properties from a private property owner, and the city had originally intended for the use of these properties to be a civic campus. Back approximately, I'd say roughly around back in November, Lake Stevens Senior Housing in 2016, they applied for a development agreement to the city of Lake Stevens. During this development review application, the city ended up selling these properties back in 2017 to Lake Stevens Senior Housing. And as many of you may or may not be aware, and I highlighted just some key points of the resolution here, is that the master plan originally, what it did is a development agreement. It vested a conceptual site plan and the zoning code and regulations at that time. It essentially vests the developer in place for development regulations. So it vested them under the current critical area regulations at that time, which is a previous code for critical areas. So, and in addition, it also vested them under the 2014 Stormwater Manual, which is currently what we're still in until the new manual is adopted. So as you can see here, the vesting period could be up to 10 years. So that is why when this development is being reviewed currently, it is vested actually under older development regulations. So as an example I'd like to provide is that shouldn't if in future upcoming correspondence you see that a wetland buffer is smaller than what is under current regulations, that is why, because they are vested under the older regulations with different standards. So the conceptual site plan at that time for that particular development agreement, you may recall, is that it had 3 different phases. So phase 1, it had a senior housing component to it. In phase 2, it had retail, office, some employment factors in there. And then in addition, it had a component for residential housing. And here is the older site plan, the conceptual site plan for this particular area. Then in 2021, the development agreement was amended. And the development agreement was amended also to allow residential uses and greater flexibility. And that amendment was approved last year in August, I do believe. And the project planner, he is also here present this evening, shouldn't if anyone have any specific questions regarding that amendment. So consistent with the development agreement amendment, LDC, the applicant, and MSR communities, they submitted the current development application, which you see before you today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the preliminary site plan just to show it, and then I will go ahead and turn it over to the developer so they can present the development application. And currently, the development proposal does represent the residential portion and component of that phase 3 of the original conceptual master plan. They are currently proposing a mix of single family homes along with townhomes. There's a total of 28 single family homes and 29 townhomes. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Samantha, and or to Clay, whoever wanted to choose from your team, to go ahead and to present the current development proposal that was submitted to the city. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you, Christy. I'm going to pull up the presentation. All right, can everybody see that? Yep, okay. So, hello, my name is Samantha Adams. I'm with LDC, and I'm a planner that has been working on this project out on Grade Road. And I put together this presentation really just to give everyone a little bit of information about what's being proposed on site before we get into some of the questions. So Christy already mentioned some of the information that I'm going to cover, but this site, as many of you know, is located in the northeast area of the city of Lake Stevens. It totals 22 acres of land, and it's made up of 6 different parcels. It's in the planned business district zone, and the site is currently vacant, but Catherine Creek and associated wetlands are present on site. A little bit about, oh, I guess I could be in presentation mode. A little bit about the proposed development. So of the 22 acres on site, roughly 6 acres will be used for development. The remaining area on site will be left as protected critical areas and recreational open space. And like Christy mentioned, what's proposed on site is 57 residential housing units. So half will be your standard single family home, half will be attached single family home. Let's see, and then a little bit about where we're at in the permitting process. So as Christy mentioned, there was a development agreement that was amended last year that was done through the administrative modification process. And then now we're currently at the point where the master development plan and the preliminary plat are being reviewed concurrently by the city of Lake Stevens. Then for your environmental permitting and review, it's your standard Cipa and stormwater permit issuance by the Department of Ecology. So I just want to touch on a couple pieces of the planned business district code as it relates to developing fully residential within this zone. So developing fully residential in the planned business district is allowed when certain criteria are met. And I just want to go over those 4 criteria. And Clay White is going to go over the first criteria, and that's the economic analysis. That's the first requirement.
Great, Samantha. So one of the things I'm happy to take questions is I was involved with the project with the previous folks that were looking at developing the site for the senior housing and assisted living facility. And when the original development agreement was applied for as part of that project, you know, what Christy had shared with you is there was some commercial components that were originally planned for. But actually, after the development was approved, we went through the same analysis on commercial, and it was kind of discovered that it just wasn't economically feasible to provide commercial there. It just didn't have the right mix of traffic. And we had hired an economist as part of that project too. And it just didn't pencil out. It just doesn't work for that site for the uses that were proposed. So fast forward, we're part of this project. It was looked at as well. And so while the code mentions mixed use or commercial uses, it also has a process where if you're not going to propose a commercial element to your project, there's kind of two tests. One is, demonstrating why it may not work. But two is just making sure that it's not going to frustrate the overall goals of the city in terms of jobs or economic development. And so we had a study that was produced by Eco Northwest. That's part of our application packet that just goes through that, the code requirements as to why we're not having a commercial component as part of this project. But the second piece that the code talks about is when you have the choice to have at least 5% of the site in commercial or civic uses. And so what we've chosen to do as part of this project is to focus on civic uses. And so you're going to see what Samantha is going to present to you is that we're looking at a public trail that will connect Grade Road down to the south, which should be a great feature for the community when you want to connect to the Centennial Trail. So I'm here if you have questions later on, but Samantha, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Clay. Yeah, so he mentioned the second criteria that must be met. That's the 5% of your overall residential area being designated as civic use. And we'll talk a little bit more about the public trail in a couple slides. So the third requirement is that you develop your residential site at a density that's higher than 3 dwelling units per acre. With our 57 units proposed on site, it's a density of about 12 dwelling units per acre. And the last criteria that must be met is that multifamily apartments on site must not account for more than 75% of your total residential use on site. We aren't proposing multifamily apartments, so that's the last criteria doesn't necessarily apply.
And Samantha, can I add one thing?
Yep.
Just on the dwelling units per acre, if you take a look at the total site, we're actually pretty low density. It's actually less than 3 dwelling units per acre. So that's why you'll see so much open space. There's critical area setbacks. What we're calculating the 12 is that the code talks about calculating the density for the area that is developable. That's probably a good way to describe it. So that's where you get 12 dwelling units per acre. It's 12 dwelling units of the area that's developable. But as a whole site, you'll see that it's less than 3.
Yep, thank you for clarifying.
Mm-hmm.
So another point that I want to mention about the code is the requirement for designated open space. So I have a couple of screenshots from the site plan, which highlights really just how much of the site will be left as protected critical areas and what portion of the site will be usable for residents to recreate outside. So the light green area is all of the area that will be left protected critical areas, and the darker green is on-site parks and the public trail. So the open space on site totals just over an acre, and the sites or the parks on site are typical of what you would see in a subdivision. So there's an outdoor sports court that is proposed. There are some grills and picnic tables and benches, and just some really nice area to hang out outside along Grade Road. So this is the southern portion of the site. And then we're just going to talk briefly about the public trail. So this is the trail that we're using to provide additional recreation area outside, as well as to hit the civic requirements. So it is public. It's not just available for the potential residents of this subdivision, but this is going to be a roughly 1/3 of an acre, 10-foot wide hog fuel path that'll weave kind of in and out between the wetland buffers on site. So hopefully it provides a really nice walking trail for residents and neighbors to get outside and have some nice wetland viewing areas, and On the next slide here, you can see it's proposed to come all the way down to Hartford Road. Hartford Road does have a pedestrian lane. If you follow Hartford Road east, it will meet up with the Centennial Trail. So the intent is to kind of provide a connection to the regional trail system, and hope that people from, you know, this development or neighboring developments can hop on the Centennial Trail. And then next, we're going to talk a little bit about stormwater management, and I'm going to have project engineer Joe Hopper just talk about that.
Okay, can everybody hear me? All right, I'm Joe Hopper with LDC. We have done some preliminary analysis of the stormwater on site, and what we're proposing to do is to treat the stormwater in a stormwater vault, or what is in the industry called an R tank. That's one of the options that we're looking at. We're still flexible because we're in the preliminary phases of things. But what we're going to do is collect all the stormwater runoff, store it in a standard stormwater vault type structure underground. That allows us to use the space that the stormwater facilities are in as a dual purpose. We can place park area on top of that, so we're using the space twice. What we'll do is we are modeling our stormwater to the pre-developed runoff rates and peak rates, so that we will not harm the downstream environment. We will disperse the flows from our stormwater facility into the on-site wetland. And then once the water gets into the wetland, it then flows further to the south to Hartford Road, to the ditch along Hartford Road, and then ultimately discharges to Catherine Creek. The stormwater analysis that was done is based on Department of Ecology Stormwater Manual and the City of Lake Stevens stormwater requirements as amended. So that's about it on stormwater. Just as there's any concerns, what we're doing is the way we model this, just I don't want to get too technical here in this meeting, but what we do is we model this as if the site was previously forested, and that's the runoff rate that we target to our runoff rate coming out of our facility. So actually, we are improving the runoff rate because, as you know, the site is somewhat forested, but also is open, a pasture type wetland buffer area as well. And so what we will be doing is actually reducing the stormwater flow, peak flow rates and volumes coming from the site into the wetland and then over to Catherine Creek. So we like to say that it's an improvement on the existing condition. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. Okay, and then lastly, I just want to talk quickly about the proposed home design. So the master development plan code requires a bit of more upfront. It requires a bit more materials than your typically preliminary plat process. So part of that is solidifying and identifying the design of homes on site kind of at the beginning phases of the project. So this is an example of what the applicant is thinking about for home design. Single family homes will be 2 stories tall, roughly 2,700 square feet. And the townhome design is very similar in color and materials. These will be a bit smaller, around 1,500 square feet, and they will range between 2 and 3 stories. So that's really the last of my presentation, and I think we can get into the questions now, but I hope some of that information was helpful. And I don't know if I should continue sharing my screen, Christy.
If you don't mind, if you could pull just back up the plat map for it, and then that way we can use that for reference for public questions. And thank you, Samantha and Clay and Joe. Okay, With that, Jenny, if you want to go ahead and go through and catch people who have questions. So our first question will be,
I don't see hands raised from what I'm looking at.
we do have one question from Tom Matlack. Thank you, Tom, for putting in your question. Yes, and Tom, if you'd like to ask your question, please do. So Jenny, that would be from Tom Matlack, and I don't know if he's muted or if he has the ability to unmute himself. Gotta love these online meetings.
Tom, do you see that you can unmute yourself?
Well, at least I can say you're not an unruly bunch. Let's see. It won't let me, he says. So, and maybe he can, I don't want to ask him to type it, but let's see here. Let's see what else we can get going here.
Oh, did that work?
Yes.
Yes, that's
Oh,
great.
Thank
Thank
goodness.
you. Okay,
So
go
I'll-
for it.
So I'll go really fast. There is a deadline for comment period on this neighborhood meeting. I do not understand why you're shutting down comments for a neighborhood meeting on a Saturday at 4. That was in the public notice.
Sure, and actually that's an excellent question. I don't know if you might have missed the first part of the meeting, but that just happens to relate to the initial first comment period that the city issues from the code. It's a period of 14 days. So that one happens to end on, I believe it's Monday.
Oh.
It's the following Monday, I think the 24th, but then
Oh.
there will be several other comment periods after that.
Thank you very much. There's
Yeah,
usually a list of public agencies that get mailed these projects. The Tulalip Tribe, Department of Commerce, Department of Ecology. When do those mailings go out?
That's an excellent question. So right now, currently, I should post, I'll post something to the city's website, but how the city's review process works is that this is the first step in the process of getting information out to the public. It's a neighborhood meeting to let people know, hey, this project just came in the door. This is what it's about. Then there will be a technical review process for the project, which is what I believe you were just alluding to. And that is where a Cipa threshold determination is made on the project about its environmental mitigation components. And that is what gets routed out to all the outside agencies for comment. And that will happen at a later date. My guess is probably about a month and a half from now is probably when that will happen.
Thank you very
Yes,
much. The
certainly.
the economic analysis, I attended the docket hearing with the county this morning. Planner Wright was there, and some of the statements in the economic analysis are directly opposite of what your docket proposals, your UGA expansions, but the application says that this has already been accepted. So if we have a problem with the economic analysis, is it too late, or can we send in comments on that?
If you're referring to the economic analysis for this specific proposal, you
Yes.
can submit comments in on it. The city has yet to start its technical review on the documents submitted on the application, so you can certainly do that. And just so you are aware, and you probably are aware, there's two separate things going on, the UGA expansions and then individual development application proposals. So this particular project is part of an original master plan that previously did have a Cipa issued on it. And this particular development proposal being submitted residential uses is allowed in the plan.
I understand. I
So-
understand all that.
Mhm.
That's wonderful. So the original plan, Mark and I were on the original committee. If we would, if we begged for an espresso stand, a souvenir shop, something to attract people off the Centennial Trail, a taco bus, bike rentals, is there any way we can petition the applicant or the owners for at least a little bit of retail in there, since that was the original intent?
Well, I do have to say, it's certainly worth submitting your comments, and currently right now you do have the ear of the applicant who is listening.
Thank you. All right, I'll send something in. Finally, to the engineer, the ditch along Grade Road has a name. It's on the old sheet. It's called the Levitt Ditch. And the Levitts used to live over on Hartford Drive in the brick veneer house, which is the last one before the empty space that you guys own. And the Levitt Ditch would flood. And I know somewhere in the project it says that you're not getting any downstream flooding, but that simply isn't true. The Walker Hill development on 36 is tight lined into that ditch. I'm 90% sure about that. So I just, it's very easy to say that we're going to, shunt water off into this ditch that it's really hard to see. The reed canary grass is crazy, but just something to keep in mind. There is downhill flooding on this site. And if you go far enough downhill, then you run into our dike system along the outlet creek with the sandbags, which I sure hope you've all seen. Thank you. That's it for me. I will try to unmute now.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments.
Next, we have Sue Fernand.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sort of followed this area. I used to live up that way, and I think I missed the first few minutes, but originally it was going to be senior type assisted living. I think it's been rechained. My question is, as a senior, also having young grandkids coming up the rank, I researched this LLC. It looks like it's an international LLC, specialty of luxury homes. Can I assume this will not be affordable for seniors or first-time starters?
I would defer that question to the applicant since we don't ask about the cost of the housing proposed.
And I'll just answer, I don't know the cost of the housing, but I do know it is market rate housing. One of the things that this project does accomplish, though, is that it provides some townhome development, which is generally going to be cheaper than single family detached homes, and they're smaller. So it should be able to provide a variety of ranges, but it will be at, it is market rate housing. It's not age restricted either.
Thank you.
And I think Jacob, I don't know if you have him on your list, but he sent in a question that he'd like to speak.
Hello. Is this thing on? Did I fix it?
Yes.
Hi. I suppose most of my questions have to do with the fact that the whole thing is a wetland. Like I'd imagine a lot of you guys, I live directly on this field and meadow and wetland. I look over it every day. It literally backs up to my front yard. Considering the amount of wildlife and the fact that it is a designated protected wetland, has WDFW been asked for opinion or comment on any of this? Or maybe a second opinion from the Everett Community College Geoscience program, something like that?
In fact, the city has reached out to DOE and DFW, Department of Fish and Wildlife. They will also be notified through the review process.
Okay.
Yes. So the answer is yes to that.
Okay.
And our stormwater person, she's also in attendance this evening. And I don't know if you follow the city's capital improvement or the CIP capital improvement facilities and projects, but we do have several projects listed for studies and improvements to address downstream drainage.
Well, I guess I'll jump around a little bit. That's kind of my
Okay.
third thing I was going to bring up was, well, just kind of at risk of being that guy. My dad always told me just because it's legal doesn't make it right. Catherine Creek floods regularly. Hartford floods regularly. We've all seen the roads closed. We've all seen the sandbags. The word on the street is the old police department, that's now the library, is sinking and the foundation is cracking. My backyard that backs up to this field decreases by about 6 inches a year just from erosion. How is decreasing the amount of permeable land going to not cause more flooding? I found a study that was done in 2019, the final technical memorandum of Blake Stevens, done by DCG.
Mhm.
And basically what it seems to say is all the culverts are undersized, the wires undersized, the creek's overflowing, and the best thing we can do is leave it alone. And then mentioning that storm drains are going to go directly into Catherine Creek. I can't imagine this not causing flooding like crazy and just destroying the whole habitat.
I do think the project engineer, that is not what will be proposed. There will not be direct discharge into Catherine Creek. And I don't know if the project engineer would like to address that.
Yeah,
And that would
sure.
be Joe Hopper, just because we'd like to get accurate information out there. And the city does realize this is an existing issue and concern of the public, which is why we have taken steps forward to address this with capital improvement projects and studies, so we can work on remediating this and correcting the natural flow in the area. So Joe, I'd like you, if you can, to address his questions.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Jake, for asking. So to reiterate where our discharge is for the stormwater, we will be discharging to the wetland, and actually not even into the wetland, into the wetland buffer. So there will be some overland flow from the detention system across the buffer to the wetland. Naturally, the wetland then does drain to the Hartford Road ditch or the Levitt Ditch, as I've been informed now, and onto Catherine Creek. Downstream, we are aware that there are some issues with the conveyance capacities. That's a city issue. That's not necessarily our issue. I don't want to defer that as far as this development is concerned. And in the technical review, the city will bring up those items as well. And if there are things that this development will affect, the developer and the engineers will be responsible for contributing or for correcting some issues, or at least sharing in the cost of some of those things as the city identifies them. So that will be part of the technical review. I don't want to step on the city's opinion on that, but that's typically how these projects go. So what we're trying to do as far as the development is to take the stormwater drainage that comes from the new impervious areas, put it in a holding tank that releases the flows at flow rates that are even less than what's currently there, currently flowing to the wetland, and also cleaning the water at the same time. So we have a twofold facility that will help mitigate, I don't say hopefully, it will help mitigate the stormwater releases from the development to a pre-developed condition that's actually more conservative than what is there now. If you imagine the difference between a field versus a forest and how the water gets collected or runs off from those different scenarios, there's more water runoff the less planted the area is. So what the drainage code requires us to do is to model the pre-developed runoff at the forested condition, which is the most conservative, which is the lowest flow rates coming off of a site. And then we model our releases from our detention system to that rate. So we're actually reducing the flow rates coming from our facility, and we're holding the water back. So yes, there are impervious areas, but we are collecting all that, and we're reducing the flow rate to the downstream facilities, including the creeks.
Thank you for sharing that and also specifying the flow rates. I think that that is appreciative and good information for people to know. One thing though, as you pointed out, Jacob, that this project can't directly solve or reduce directly is some of the flooding that occurs. It would be south and to the west down on Hartford on the low points there. As you know, it was just recently closed just a week or two ago. Those are issues that the city has been looking at with some studies, and that our surface water coordinator, myself and other people, the public works director, have been meeting with a consultant to see what can be done to analyze that area, to change the drainage channel to provide additional storage down there for that. Did you have any further questions, or do you mind if anyone else asks another question at this time? I don't want to cut you off.
No, not at all. Just one more,
Okay.
I suppose. Thank you
Certainly.
for being so detailed and specific. I really appreciate it. Like I said, the thing I'm the most concerned with is kind of the nature aspect of everything. I really like the fact that there's a lot of left alone open space, a lot of like community area, a lot of wetlands still left. I like the idea of the community walking trail. That's, nice, get everybody more outdoors. One thing that I'm a little concerned with there is there really a plan for how that's going to be executed? Because I don't know if you guys are just looking at topographical maps or plat maps and all that stuff, or if you've all visited the site. But and I'm not trying to be snarky, but I can tell you at the moment it's all about 4 inches underwater. It's all ankle deep, so I'm not so sure how we're gonna put a trail through there without filling in the entire thing.
Yes, you have a very valid point. We are discussing this today at staff, at least as a part of our technical review that we have started, particularly the area, it would be north of Hartford Road. That is a low point there. Currently, a hog field trail is proposed, and that may or may not be sufficient due to the water table level that's currently there. And same with a crossing. Obviously, there are some details that will need to be fleshed out as this project goes through the review process. And this is very early on. The project literally just came in the door several weeks ago. So our goal is to get the project out in front of the community to get input like this. So I appreciate it, but just please stay tuned and continue to submit your comments as the city moves through our technical review process of this, and our stormwater and public works and engineers continue to look at the development proposal.
Okay, thank you very much.
Next is Mark Summers.
There's my picture, there's my voice. Okay. Well, I've got a lot of questions. I don't want to get carried away with a ton of them. So I want to go back up a little bit first. In the process of creating a new site plan based on the old, you went from a very large healthcare plan, scaled that down to something smaller that was now just entirely residential. And I'm wondering, in that process of redesigning the site plan to fit current needs and current economy, did you consider affordable housing of some type? Did you look into that?
Yeah, Sammy, I can take this one if you like.
Yeah, that's fine. It's just hard for me to see who's speaking when I don't have this window up. So I think all of you can see the window. I apologize, but I do need it up. Okay.
Yeah, just talk a little bit about the old project. It is 2 different groups of people that are working on that. The previous project went through a lot of design iterations after the development agreement was approved, and it ended up that it just wasn't financially feasible for the group. And then it sat vacant for a number of years, and others looked at it for the same thing, and it just wasn't gonna pencil out because of the just it's a complex site. So in terms of affordable housing, that is not something that we looked at as part of our original submittal here. We're proposing it just as market rate housing. But I will tell you that you know, providing the townhomes provide some missing middle housing that's typically going to be at a price point that's going to be better than the, you know, single family detached. So, you know, it will provide a mix of price points, which is a good thing.
Well, this is a rather large housing project. I guess your answer is then the townhomes would be affordable or single person, senior citizen, more geared for that.
I think it's just typically that townhomes, when you have attached housing, it's at a price point that's lower than market rate detached housing. You know, the approach on this was to you know, take a look at the planned business district requirements and make sure we provide a project that meets, and oftentimes what we've provided exceeds the requirements of the code. So it's not affordable housing on the technical sense. I just pointing out that townhomes are going to be at a price point that's lower than if it was all single family detached homes.
Well, the city has a innovative housing program.
Mhm.
That would have been something good to have consulted with prior to getting really, you know, all the way into a development plan. I feel that's so unfortunate that couldn't happen. This is a huge, in my opinion, this is really filling up a large area that has been rather protected and respected in our community for a long time. Back when I'm drifting into some history here, and maybe Christy, I should do that at another time as we further another meeting, because it is something I'd really like to go into detail, but there's a lot of interest in this project, and I think the water is going to be the main, how that's handled. So I'm going to stop there and let someone else ask questions too.
Thank you, Mark.
Earl Grey is next.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I have a few different questions and they run the gambit, so please bear with me. Thank you for taking them. The original development agreement approved that they didn't go through with. I think I heard that they were grandfathering the requirements of that into this. This is a new development. How are we grandfathering an old development agreement? Am I correct in that? And if so, how does that work?
So what's being carried over from the original development agreement is not the conceptual plan portion. The development proposal, the exact development proposal was amended back in August of 2021. The portion that's being carried over from the original development agreement is the vesting of the codes that were in place at that time back in 2017 when it was approved. So as an example, that would be the critical areas buffer. And I'll just give an actual example of this. If our shoreline code currently would have 150-foot buffer on Catherine Creek, vesting under the previous code, the prior code, which is allowed for the RCWs, and you can grandfather, I'm using air quotes because that's not the technical term, but it's a very common term that people use, that it runs with the land and that goes through and it's carried, and according to this DA, it's for 10 years. It was originally for 5 and it was extended 5 more years back in 2021. So it's a total of 10 years. So that's the portion that's carried over. The actual concept of what's developed there, that can be amended through the development agreement process. And that's what was amended last year, back in August. And I don't know exactly how public that process was or how many people were involved in that process, but it was changed back in 2021 in the summer. And so the development proposal now coming forward is residential, but in order to provide residential in the planned business district, they do have to provide that economic analysis on how they are meeting the requirements of the master development plan. And there are actual set criteria within the code. There's, I was just gonna pull it up, see how many I had it on my screen here. There is 1, 2, 3, 4. There is 8 different components of a master development plan that the city has in the code that the applicant has to meet. So these are the components that the city is in the process of reviewing currently, and the city has not provided technical comments back to the applicant yet. Again, the purpose of this meeting is just to get information out to the public that a plan has come in for this district, and we felt that it's important to get information out because it is one of the first ones, and it's required to let the public know. So here we are in the review process, and it's working. We're getting people here and getting awareness out. And I hope that answers your question on which portions of the master development plan are carried forward and which ones can be changed.
Almost. Thank you very much for the answer. Would it be accurate to say that because, and again, air quotes, grandfathering, based on current code, if this was, you know, from a clean slate, that this would then not be approved based on those codes? I mean, since it seems like we're working to grandfather, again, air quotes, this in. If it was brand new, would it be approved?
The use could be approved per the code, but the buffer, the wetland buffers would be different. So
Right.
You would have technically less developable area, but the layout would probably be very similar, but reduced in size and scale, as would anything developed on the site with the larger critical area buffers.
So, okay, so another question, in the land use application, it talks about the approval of the development agreement, and then it was amended through an administrative modification. I believe that's what you're talking about. Is that correct?
Yes, you're absolutely correct.
Who made that? Who approved that administrative modification?
That the minor modifications, let me pull it back up. I believe that was approved by City Council, and Dave Levitt, our planning manager, is here. He was the project planner on that specific proposal. And let me just pull up that DA agreement, and I'll go ahead and pull it up on the screen. And then in the meantime, Dave, if you would like to pitch in any 2 cents worth on that minor modification process, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I can chime in on that. So the administrative modification is actually a type 1. It's an administrative decision. It does not require approval. It doesn't need to go to the hearing examiner. It doesn't require to go back to the city council. Development agreements are a type of land use application that can be modified through that administrative modification if it meets the criteria in, I believe it's chapter 1416C.025. You need to meet all of the criteria in there. Some of the major ones is that it basically can't create new access points. It can't increase the density or intensity of development on the site. As long as it meets all of the criteria under the administrative modification, it can be modified through that admin mod process as opposed to being processed as a new development agreement. And so that was what was issued back in August. That is a decision that's issued, being a type 1 decision, is issued by the community development director. So I'm not sure if that's been uploaded to the city website, but that is something that we can upload or make available so people can see that the staff report, the decision issued by the community development director on that administrative modification.
And-
Yes, that has been uploaded, and so have all the 2 other development agreements. I uploaded them to each application last week, so you'll see those uploaded there. And I can go ahead and share my screen right now if that would be appropriate. If Samantha, if you wanted to stop screen sharing really quick and I'll just pull it up, I'd appreciate that.
While you're doing that again, if you could forgive me for my ignorance, but who is the community development? Forget the title, what you just said. I'm just really trying to get to who approved this.
Sure.
Yeah, so Russ Wright is the community development director. I don't have my participant screen up on, but I know that he was on earlier. But yes, he's the one that has authority per the Lake Stevens Municipal Code to issue decisions and approve applications for type 1 land use applications, including administrative modifications.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have sort of one comment, and there was some discussion of this earlier. And one of the things that I want to say, I know one of the homeowners there was talking about it, but this development, or a couple of things about this. The previous attempt at a development, as I understand it, it was abandoned based on it wasn't economically viable because of the wetlands. That was relayed. As I understand it, because of the wetlands, there just wasn't enough developable area to go do it. And I do know, and includes a presentation made by a consultant recently at the city council, that in essence, houses by themselves for a city are losers because it costs more for police and road sweeping and plowing and repair and et cetera. I worry a lot about this sinking, like everything else that's near their sinks. So I'll just say that straight up front. The other thing is, this can't be done in a vacuum. I understand that the developer's not responsible for the existing flooding. It's been told that the city is, but everyone that lives in this area knows that from the apartments just north of south of Hartford, all of Hartford, the whole area has flooding issues. And I understand that the water will be retained and then fed out into the open space at a lower rate than it might be now based on study, but it still rains and it's still going to have water, and the same amount of water is going to go into what's left of a smaller open space. And that whole area floods as it is right now. And all of this entire development goes right up against Catherine Creek, which is a spawning stream. And I would need a lot more convincing to be convinced that this is not going to make things worse. And also, it is bad right now. And what we've got kind of a mess right now. And we're saying, well, we're pretty sure that we're not going to make it worse. But again, it can't be looked at in a vacuum because it's a mess right now. That's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Could I just jump in real quick? There's some concerns that have been
Certainly.
voiced a couple times as far as sinking things. We have a geotechnical engineer also on the project team, and we've already done a little bit of investigation as far as the underlying soils. There's some pockets of peat that we're having to deal with as far as the development areas. And what we've determined is that the homes will be built on pin piles in a lot of cases, depending on the underlying soil on the site. Every house will be a little bit different, but that will prevent the foundations from sinking because we will drive piles deep enough that they can be on more stable soil. So we won't be floating our foundations on unstable soil and we won't have that sinking effect. So for that concern, that's what we're looking into as far as some of the development conditions. So I just wanted to bring that up because that came up a couple times already.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I didn't want to get too technical, but that seems to be the response that people want. And I respect that. So the peat that is excavated out in order to get down to structural fill, if they don't do pin piles, that material will be utilized on site for landscaping and things like that. That's a requirement just from DOE manual stormwater. In addition, I just want to point out from planning perspective, whether the developable area portions on this site were to be developed with commercial, with a large parking area, senior housing, or single family homes, they are still capped with impervious surface amounts in the stormwater requirements of the manual. So regardless, at least as far as the stormwater flow goes, they are held to the same level of criteria of environmental responsibility, retention, detention, and treatment. As far as the issue goes with the downstream and existing issues, that is obviously more complicated, and we realize that. Your city council has acknowledged that. They have structured and allocated monies and funds for studies and time and staff, and to go to outside consultants to look to see what can be done with different projects. So any project that's developed on the site, they have their own individual responsibility. They're required to mitigate their on-site impacts and any downstream impacts. That is our responsibility as the city, regardless of what type of use is proposed here, if it's consistent with code, that we are charged with regulating and making sure that they mitigate those environmental impacts. So we are in the process of assessing this development at this time, but that is our legal responsibility and the applicant's legal responsibility too. The larger project downstream and what's happening, this project should assist in alleviating a little bit of it, but it's not going to solve it. We know that. We know that just as a fact. So you're not going to see probably a huge difference, but ideally the city is working towards that goal, and the council has allocated some money for studies to look into what can be done to address the larger problem that you and the citizens have identified and that the city's aware of. I don't know if any other staff wants to chime in, but that's kind of the intent and the plan of things. Do we have all the funding? No, we don't as a city. Are we hoping to get grants and additional funding from outside sources? Yes, we are hoping to. Next question.
Sue Fernand.
Hi, thank you for letting me ask a second question and ignore my ignorance because this isn't my specialty. But I used to live up near the high school, and I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago, and I don't know the name of it, but it was off Highway 92 and behind Highland Elementary School. A very, very large development went in and was a shock to everyone because at the time it was explained that the permit was, I think, maybe 15 years. They had asked for the permit in 2006. Don't quote me on the exact year. Then the economy, and they renewed it, and then they renewed it, and they were coming to the end of it, and they had to get something going. I thought, and I may be wrong, that the city had decided that there was only X amount of permits like that still out there because the economy had been hurt and these permits were coming up. Now I'm hearing this one is on the second round and they're able to go back and keep some of the requirements of the first permit. And I thought we weren't going to do that, that the new permits would have to follow the new codes. And if that is not true, how many permits are still out there that will be able to build on old codes? Thank you.
long after the prison guards directly attacked the officer.
Okay, sorry, I just had some extra comments or some information pop in there. Sue, in response to your question, I am not aware or familiar, since I am recently new to staff and started here last year, that I am not aware of the historical reference of that project. I do know that this particular project has been around since 2016. And they did have, and they do have vesting requirements. I'm not familiar, I'm sorry, and I apologize for the project that you're referring to. And I don't know if any other staff who is on this meeting has any background information to respond to her. If so, please feel welcome to speak. And if not, I'll have to save that, or if you could email me and I could address your question offline.
I can answer that, Christy.
Okay, thank you. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, so during the Great Recession, so we have state laws that outline how long it takes to build a subdivision. And it gives you a number of years to get all of your permits and to build your homes. It takes a long time. I can tell you just from, I spent a lot of time in the public sector as a city planner, and on the private side, there's a lot that goes into it. During the Great Recession, the legislature gave a good amount of additional time for projects because no one was building during the Great Recession. So this is completely different. Those projects should be through the system that's been exercised, that extension time. This is a development agreement. It's a process allowed by state law. It's been around for a very long time. An agreement process that kind of outlines how you go through the development process. So those projects should be all through the system. And it was done because of the Great Recession. This is a completely different permit process and utilizes different mechanisms. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Clay. And Sue, what Clay is referring to, and I'm hoping that this is probably what you're getting at, it's not a development agreement, but it's just a vested subdivision that where the state law, the RCW, allows X amount of time, let's say 7 years as an example, that they can vest under what was approved before it comes null and void. So that is probably what I'm presuming you're referring to.
And I can add a little bit of information. This is Russ Wright, the Community Development Director. The project that Sue is referring to is actually another project that was subject to a development agreement. It was an inherited development agreement and annexation agreement with Snohomish County for a large subdivision. That too went through a modification, which was a major modification, and essentially they'll follow the same process that's happening here. It had vesting rights for a period of time. As far as are there other projects like that in the city? I think as Clay suggested, most of those projects have probably worked their way through the system. So I don't think there's a lot out there, or if any at this point. And I can also address the questions being floated right now in the chat box. Yes, the city has allocated funds to do studies along the outfall channel from Lake Stevens. That is totally separate from this project. That has been an ongoing project starting last year, identifying several capital projects throughout the downtown area, the outfall channel, that could improve the localized flooding conditions. So what's being referred to in the chat is totally separate from anything to do with this project.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the clarification and the information.
Mark Summers has his hand up.
Yes, I do. The more I sit here and listen and look at the map, I wanted to make sure I left this meeting expressing myself that I can see that there's been a lot of work, thorough work put into the design of this project.
Totally off.
You have to turn it off.
Yeah,
on the
there's some
top.
background audio that's annoying. Okay, I'll carry on. This is a very well thought out plan. It's a good plan in the wrong place. There's a small amount of buildable land in the northwest corner. It's all documented. I think a project that goes in should be designed to fit on what is a buildable land. This is way too much encroachment upon a wetlands and Spawn Creek, Fish Creek. There's way too much, it's just too big in my opinion. And back in 2006, the community had a bit of an uprising with the subdivision proposal at that time. And there was quite a response to that, and that project subdivision got stopped. And there's a whole history that we've learned today of where we are now, and we're back where we were. So I wanted to make it clear that I'm with my friends here that love nature and want to preserve what we have left of it. There's plenty of housing construction going on in this city. There's buildable lands everywhere that you can squeeze in single family homes and townhomes. There's a need for that too. I think that actually that corner is a great spot for a cottage village that both the county supports. The city has an innovative housing plan. I think there could be a much better solution to using this property than filling up so much with housing. That's all. I'm done.
Thank you, Mark. Jenny, do we have anyone else in queue? I'm looking through the chats here to see if there's any other further questions. I see one new message here. Okay. It was a comment from Earl. Let's see. Any further questions?
Oh, Christy, I do have one comment. Will there be a list of participants tonight? Any information about where they live and how, if their email address or anything?
We typically do not make that information public because we have to get a waiver or information from folks. I do have an interested parties list if someone asks or specifically requests to be part of that list. It is in the project file. You'd have to make a public records request for that.
Okay, well, no, that's good to know. You can ask to be put on a list, a contact list.
Yes, and I will go over that just as soon as we have all the questions answered.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one more question?
Of course.
We're going to have playgrounds, open space, recreational area, and the trail. Will there be on-site parking for those picnic tables and barbecue grills?
Yes, Tom, there will be some parallel parking spaces along the internal drives on site.
Thank you. And then the city is having trouble dedicating what we call tot lots or subdivision playgrounds. The city no longer really wants those dedicated. How are you going to get around that contradiction?
The open space areas are going to be private. They're part of the development with the exception of the trail system. So those will be maintained privately.
That is correct. There would be a public access easement through the private roadway, the public roadway to access the trail through the development, but the separate recreational tracks, as Clay just noted, are owned and maintained by the HOA.
But is the public allowed to use the barbecue grills or the playground equipment?
It's being designed for the residents. The trail is open to the public.
Then how does that meet the 5% civic use?
It's the trail, if you calculate the square footage.
Beauty bark? Oh, wow. I think we need a taco truck. Thank you.
Thank you. So does anyone have any technical comments? If there's no further comments I see coming in, I do want to share some information about where to go ahead and provide further comments to through the city's review process. There'll be opportunity for that, and you can always email comments into myself, the project planner. My email is available on the application page, the notice of application, and it's on the city's website under current projects. You'll see it listed under the file numbers. If you click on it, it has all my information, and you can feel free to call me or send me an email with any further questions, comments, or suggestions that you have. With that, I would like to say thank you, everyone, for having well, I'm going to call this the successful public meeting, one, because we had a good turnout, good dialogue, questions, and we were able to get information out there about the initial project proposal. So thank you very much for attending, and please let your neighbors know about the proposal and where to get information, and they can always contact me if they have further questions. And thank you, Jenny, for moderating, and the applicant for presenting this evening. And with that, I will go ahead and I guess we will close the meeting. Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening and a good weekend.